In the cold, silent depths of space, there was nothing but darkness. Stars twinkled faintly far away, and the only movement was the slow drift of the alien exploration ship, the Scepter. Its sleek, metallic body sliced through the empty void, a tiny speck in the grand expanse of the universe. The crew aboard the Scepter was a group of intelligent, curious beings from a distant star system. They were explorers, driven by the desire to learn and discover the unknown. They had traveled through many galaxies, but this mission felt different. They had heard rumors of something ancient, something lost. Little did they know the discovery they were about to make would change everything. The captain of the Scepter, a wise and cautious alien named Zelith, stood at the helm, staring at the control panels in front of him. His crew was busy with their tasks, but something had caught his attention. It was a faint, repeating signal, almost like a whisper in the darkness. It wasn't coming from any known source, and it wasn't in any language they recognized. The signal was strange, filled with static and distortion, but it was there, clear enough to be detected by the ship's advanced sensors. "Captain, you need to see this," said Thera, the ship's communication expert. She was hunched over her console, her fingers dancing across the controls as she tried to isolate the source of the signal. Zelith's eyes narrowed, and he walked over to her station. The signal was weak, but it was constant. It seemed to pulse, in a pattern, like a message trying to break through the endless silence of space. "Can we trace it?" Zelith asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of curiosity. Thera nodded. "I think so. It's coming from a distant sector, not far from here, but it's strange. It's not from any known civilization." Zelith looked at her, a spark of intrigue in his eyes. "Do you think it could be something ancient?" The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ancient civilizations had long been a source of fascination for the crew of the Scepter. They had encountered the ruins of long-dead species before, but this was different. There was something about it that felt purposeful. "Perhaps," Thera said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But if it is ancient, then it could be something dangerous. We don't know what we're dealing with." Zelith didn't hesitate. "Set a course for the signal. We need to find out what this is. It might be a discovery that changes everything." The crew quickly shifted into action, and the Scepter adjusted its course, heading toward the mysterious source of the signal. The quiet hum of the engines filled the ship as they traveled deeper into the unknown. The crew worked together, focusing on the task at hand, but there was a palpable sense of unease. What were they about to find? What lay ahead in the vast, unexplored reaches of space? As they journeyed closer to the source, the signal grew stronger. It was no longer just a faint whisper, it was a loud, rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate through the very fabric of the ship. It was both eerie and captivating. The air seemed to vibrate with the energy of it. Zelith couldn't help but feel a growing sense of anticipation. What could be so important that it had survived for so long, hidden in the vastness of space? The crew's excitement mixed with a sense of dread as they drew closer to the signal's source. Thera's console beeped rapidly, and she turned to Zelith, her eyes wide. "Captain, we've found it. There's a ship, an enormous ship, far out here. It's not active, but it's definitely there." Zelith's heart skipped a beat. A ship, out here, so far from any known space. How had it remained undiscovered for so long, and why was it sending out this signal? "Bring us closer," Zelith commanded, his voice steady, though his mind raced. "Prepare for boarding. Get ready for anything." The Scepter moved cautiously toward the massive ship, the crew watching intently. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was enormous, its shape almost unrecognizable, covered in layers of space dust and debris, as if it had been forgotten for centuries. Its surface was scarred, as though it had been through battles, its once gleaming metal now dull and worn. There were no signs of life, no active signals, no crew. It was silent, floating in the empty expanse of space, abandoned but not destroyed. Captain Thera said, her voice full of awe and fear, "I've never seen anything like this. This ship, it's ancient, and it's human." Zelith's eyes widened. Human. He had heard of humanity, the species that once roamed the stars, but they had disappeared long ago. No one knew what had happened to them, but their ships and artifacts had been scattered throughout the galaxy, remnants of a forgotten past. "How is it possible?" Zelith muttered to himself. "A human ship, here after all these centuries." The crew looked at one another, unsure of what to make of this discovery. It was one thing to find ruins, but this was different. This wasn't just was a ship, and it was still out here, in the depths of space, waiting to be found. "We need to board it," Zelith said, his voice filled with determination. "Prepare to investigate. Whatever this ship is, it holds secrets. We need to know what happened to humanity and why this ship has been hidden for so long. The scepter slowly moved into docking position, and the crew suited up, ready for whatever awaited them inside. The tension was thick in the air. What would they find on that ancient ship? What was the story it had to tell? As the airlock doors opened and the crew stepped onto the forgotten human vessel, they couldn't help but feel that they were about to uncover something far more significant than any of them could have imagined. A mystery had been waiting for them, buried in the vastness of space, and now they were on the brink of uncovering it. The journey into the unknown had just begun. The air inside the ancient ship was thick with dust. The walls, once gleaming with advanced technology, now looked worn and covered in layers of grime. A faint hum could be heard echoing through the ship, the remnants of some forgotten power source still flickering in the background. The alien explorers, clad in their sleek suits, stepped cautiously onto the cold metal floor. Their boots made soft, echoing sounds as they moved through the darkened halls. Zelith, the captain, led the way, his every step deliberate. The ship, massive in size, was eerily quiet, and a sense of unease crept over the crew. It was as though the ship had been waiting for them, frozen in time, its secrets locked away. The silence was only broken by the sound of their breathing, and the occasional soft creak of the ship's metal skeleton. Despite their experience, none of them could shake the feeling that something was wrong, something lurking just beyond their reach. Thira, the communications expert, scanned the with her handheld device. Her eyes darted from one corner of the room to the next, her mind working quickly to decode anything that could give them a clue about the ship's origins. But all the signals were scrambled, distorted by time. It's as if the ship is alive, she muttered under her breath. Zelith turned to her, a slight frown on his face. Alive? I don't know, Thera replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I mean, not in the literal sense, but the ship feels like it's been waiting. There's something strange about the way the energy is moving. It's almost as if it's pulsing. The crew exchanged glances, the tension building. The scepter had barely made a dent in exploring the ship's vast corridors, and yet it already felt like they had uncovered more than they expected. The deeper they ventured, the more unsettling the feeling grew. The walls of the ship, though seemingly ancient, had carving symbols etched into them. They were intricate, almost beautiful in their design, but unfamiliar to the crew. Human, yet strange. We need to find the control center, Zelith ordered, his voice firm. He knew they had to reach the heart of the ship to understand its purpose. If there were answers to be found, they would be there. The crew continued to move through the corridors, passing by broken windows that looked out into the vast emptiness of space. Outside, stars twinkled like distant diamonds, oblivious to the mystery unfolding inside. The deeper they went, the more it seemed that the ship was intentionally hiding something. Some sections were locked, others were completely sealed off. It was as though the ship had been abandoned, but not forgotten. Its creators had left it with a purpose. And the crew of the Scepter was now part of that story. That as they approached the central hub of the ship, a massive door slid open with a slow hiss. Inside, a large chamber awaited them. The walls were lined with what appeared to be ancient consoles, their screens dark and unresponsive. But in the center of the room stood something unexpected, a human figure, or rather, a statue of one. It was tall and imposing, carved from some kind of dark material, its face serene, almost peaceful. Zelith approached cautiously. "What is this?" he whispered, unsure if the figure was a part of the ship's design, or if it had some greater significance. Thera stepped forward and ran her hand over the figure, feeling the cold surface. "This must be some sort of memorial," she said. "A tribute to whoever built this ship. Maybe it's a representation of their leader, their commander." Her voice trailed off as her device began to beep. The screen lit up with a series of strange symbols, the likes of which none of them had seen before. Thera's eyes widened in recognition. "These ... they're not just symbols," she said, her voice a mix of awe and excitement. "They're coordinates. Coordinates that lead to..." Before she could finish, the room suddenly came to life. The consoles flickered, and the walls buzzed with energy. The ship's systems, dormant for so long, began to awaken. It was as if something deep within the ship had been triggered by their presence. The lights slowly brightened, and the once lifeless ship began to hum with activity. The crew looked around, stunned, as the ship seemed to pulse with an almost sentient energy. The figure in the center of the room shifted, its eyes glowing faintly as though responding to the ship's activation. The crew held their breath. Was this some kind of automated defense system? Or was there something else going on, something more ancient, more powerful? Then, without warning, A voice echoed through the chamber. It wasn't the voice of a machine, nor was it entirely human. It was something between the two, deep and resonating with an unnatural clarity. "Who dares to awaken me?" the voice asked. The crew froze. The voice was not just a recording, it was alive. The realization hit them like a wave. This ship was more than just a relic. It had been designed, created, and perhaps even left behind intentionally. The humans had known they were fighting a war, and this ship was meant to be their last bastion, their ultimate weapon. But the war had ended, the galaxy had forgotten, and now, centuries later, the ship's message was coming to life. "We are explorers," Zeleth called out, his voice steady but cautious. "We came to learn, to understand what happened here. What is this place?" For a moment, there was silence. Then the voice responded, colder this time. "You are not meant to know. The war is not over. It never was." Zeleth's heart raced. The implications were clear. This ship wasn't just a weapon, it was a warning. A piece of a war that had been lost, but not forgotten. A war that was still very much alive in the galaxy, waiting to erupt once again. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. What had they awakened? And what consequences would their discovery bring? As the voice fell silent, the screens flickered back to life, displaying a series of images, maps of star systems, locations of long-forgotten battles, the names of fleets, and commanders, all buried in the past, and at the center of it, an ancient symbol, a mark of humanity's final defiance. "The war will find you," the voice said one last time. "It will never end." The ship's systems flickered one final time before falling dark once again, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The room was still. The ship had gone quiet once more, but the message had been delivered. Humanity's war had never ended, and now, the crew of the Scepter had unknowingly become part of a battle that spanned millennia. The silence that followed the ominous warning hung in the air like a heavy fog. The crew of the Scepter stood frozen, their eyes locked on the darkened console, their minds racing to process the voice that had spoken to them. What did it mean? "The war is not over." The words repeated in Zeleth's mind, each one a sharp, unnerving echo. They had stumbled upon something far greater than they had ever imagined. This was no simple relic from a lost civilization. This was a vessel of war, an artifact of humanity's final stand. And whatever had happened to humanity, it was far from over. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Zeleth felt a knot tighten in his stomach. They had come here to uncover history, to explore the forgotten remnants of a once great civilization. But now they were faced with something far darker, a war that had stretched beyond time, beyond space, waiting to rise again. He shook his head, trying to focus. "Thera, what did the coordinates show?" Thera, still standing by the console, was absorbed in the glowing map that had appeared on the screen. The complex lines and shapes of distant galaxies and star systems painted an unsettling picture, but it was the central point that caught her attention, the symbol. The same one she had seen earlier, the one that had appeared as the voice spoke. Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at it. The coordinates were not just random numbers, they were specific, and they were linked to some sort of command center, place that seemed to have been untouched for centuries. "It's a system," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "This symbol, it's connected to a base, a military stronghold, a place from before the war ended." Zeleth stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. "What does this base represent? Was it a final defense?" Thera nodded slowly, her fingers brushing over the screen. "I think it might be a command center or a weapons facility. It's a place humans likely built to hide, to fight back against their enemies if things went wrong. But look here," she paused, pointing to the map. "This is no ordinary facility. It's in the deepest part of an asteroid field, far from any known star routes." A chill ran down Zeleth's spine. "You mean, it's hidden?" "Yes, and it's still active, even after all this time." Zeleth glanced around at his crew. His mind was racing. If the message they had received was true, then they had only uncovered a tiny fragment of a much larger puzzle. The war was not over. It had simply been forgotten, buried beneath the layers of time and space. But now it was awakening again, and they were standing in the center of it all. "Prepare the ship," Zeleth ordered. "We're going to investigate. We need to know what's hidden in that base. Whatever humanity left behind, it might be our only chance to understand what really happened." The crew nodded in unison, their expressions serious. The air was thick with tension as they prepared to move out. The Scepter was already humming with life, its engines coming back to life as the crew worked swiftly to reconfigure the ship for the journey ahead. As they made their way to the docking bay, Zeleth couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. In the pit of his stomach, what were they going to find at this secret base? What kind of legacy had humanity left behind, and why had it been hidden so well? The answers were just beyond their reach, buried under layers of mystery and danger. But one thing was certain, they had to go there. The Scepter was already committed to this journey. The journey through the asteroid field was long and perilous. The ship weaved through the dense rocks, the crew maneuvering expertly through narrow paths, avoiding collisions. For hours, they were surrounded by nothing but the cold, silent expanse of space. The only sounds the hum of the engines and the occasional shift of metal against the void. The ship's sensors picked up strange anomalies, shifting patterns in the rocks, a faint, almost imperceptible energy field that seemed to be emanating from the asteroid field itself. Captain Thera called out, her voice tense. We're getting closer, the readings are spiking. Whatever is there, it's powerful. Zeleth looked out through the ship's viewport, his eyes narrowing. The asteroid field was thick with floating debris, but there, just beyond the largest cluster of asteroids, he saw it, the silhouette of a massive structure, hidden among the rocks. Its shape was sleek and angular, designed to blend into its surroundings, but now that they had found it, it was impossible to miss. There it is, Zeleth said, his voice low, prepared to dock. This is it. The Scepter slowed as they approached. The structure, it was much larger than anything the crew had ever seen, dwarfing the ship. The closer they got, the more its sheer scale became apparent. It was built into the heart of an asteroid, its surface covered in strange metallic alloys that seemed to absorb the light around them. It was silent to silent. Nothing moved, no sign of life or activity, yet the feeling of danger was palpable. As the ship docked with the hidden base, the crew gathered in the airlock, ready for what they might encounter. Zeloth led the way, his hand on the control panel, his heart beating faster with each passing second. They had come to uncover the truth, to see what humanity had left behind. But what if the truth was too much for them to handle? What if the war that had been forgotten was still alive in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to rise again? With a final press of a button, the airlock doors hissed open. The crew stepped out into the darkened hallway of the base. It was even colder. Here, the air thicker with a sense of abandonment. The walls were lined with unfamiliar symbols, similar to the ones they had seen back on the ship, but more intricate, more refined. The lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the corridor. Keep your eyes open, Zeleth warned, his voice sharp. Whatever happened here, it's not over, not yet. The crew moved forward, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Every turn, every corner seemed to lead them deeper into the unknown. They knew they were on the brink of uncovering something that could change the galaxy forever. But would they be ready for what they found? Only time would tell. The deeper they ventured into the base, the more the silence pressed in on them. The walls were stark and cold, built from materials that felt alien yet somehow familiar. A faint, metallic scent filled the air, as though the structure had been dormant for centuries. But despite its age, everything inside seemed unnervingly well preserved, as though waiting to be discovered. The crew moved cautiously, their senses on high alert, aware that every step could reveal something they weren't prepared for. Zeloth led the way, his mind racing. The base was vast, its corridors stretching on for what felt like miles. It was clear that this was no ordinary military facility. The layout was unlike anything they had seen before, twists and turns that seemed to have no purpose. Doors that opened and closed on their own, strange symbols etched into the walls that defied immediate comprehension. But the most unsettling part of all was the feeling that they weren't alone. The deeper they went, the more they felt like they were being watched, as if the base itself had somehow become aware of their presence. As they approached a large chamber, the air grew colder, and a low hum filled the space. The door in front of them opened with a hiss, revealing a room unlike any they had encountered so far. It was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, the floor covered with debris, but in the center of the room, surrounded by shattered panels and dormant machinery, stood something unexpected, a massive cylindrical object half buried beneath the wreckage. It glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie blue light. Is this what I think it is? Thera whispered, her voice barely audible. Zeleth stepped forward, his heart racing. The object was unlike anything they had seen before, but something about it felt important. It was clearly advanced, far beyond anything the aliens had encountered, yet it had the unmistakable markings of a human design. But it wasn't a weapon, it was something else entirely. The energy it emitted was unlike any power source they had ever studied. It looks like a core, Zeleth said, his voice steady but filled with awe. A central power core, but its design is alien. Thera moved closer, her device scanning. The object, there's something more here. This core, it's not just a power source, it's alive. Somehow it's linked to the ship, maybe even to the entire base. Zeleth's mind spun with the implications. This wasn't just technology, it was something far more advanced, something that connected the entire facility to a system of power that could reach across vast distances. But why was it hidden here, buried beneath layers of wreckage? What was its purpose? Before Zeleth could speak, the core began to hum louder, its light flickering as if it were waking up. The walls around them trembled, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated with a deep, resonant thrum. The crew stepped back instinctively, their hands reaching for their weapons. Though they knew they couldn't fight whatever was happening, the base was coming to life, and they had no idea what it meant. Thera's voice broke through the chaos. "We need to get to the control center, now." Zeleth nodded, his gaze fixed on the pulsing core. "Move out, stick together." As they rushed down the corridors toward the control center, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The walls, which had been cold and silent, now seemed to respond to their movements. The faint hum of the bass grew louder, the lights flickering in a rhythmic pattern, as though they were being led deeper into the heart of the facility. The crew's footsteps echoed through the halls, but there was something else, something unsettling. Just out of reach, a whisper on the edge of their hearing, a distant murmur that seemed to follow them when they finally reached the control room. They found it just as they expected, ancient, its consoles covered in dust and debris, but still operational. The main terminal flickered to life as they approached, and the symbols on the walls seemed to glow in response. Thera immediately moved to the central console, her hands flying over the keys as she attempted to access the systems. "Thera, what's happening?" Zeleth asked, his voice sharp with urgency. "There's a data stream coming through," she replied, her brow furrowed as she tried to decipher the information. "It's old, fragmented, but I think I can get something." The crew stood still, watching as Thera worked quickly. The room was filled with the sound of the consoles beeping and flashing, the ancient technology humming back to life. And then, as if to punctuate the moment, the main screen flickered on. A holographic image appeared in front of them, an image of a human face, tired and weathered, a commander standing in the midst of a ruined battlefield. The image was static at first, then it shifted, the man's voice crackling through the speakers. "We knew this day would come," the voice said, its tone weary but determined. "The war is not over. It has never ended. We've fought, and we've lost, but we left a message for the future, for those who would come after us." The crew exchanged glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. This wasn't just a message, it was a warning. "There is a final weapon," the voice continued, "a weapon of unimaginable power. But it is not just a weapon, it is the last hope of humanity. If you find it, do not use it. It is too powerful. It will not end the war, it will only spread it. Humanity is gone, but the war will never end." The image faded, leaving the room in stunned silence. The crew was motionless, their thoughts racing. "Did you hear that?" Thera whispered. A weapon that will spread the war. What does it mean?" Zeleth stood in silence for a moment, his mind processing the words. It was clear that humanity had left behind not just a relic of their civilization, but a terrible secret. Whatever this weapon was, it was something far beyond their understanding. But the warning was unmistakable. If they found it, they could unleash something far worse than the war humanity had fought. "We can't let this weapon fall into the wrong hands," Zeleth said, his voice hard with determination. "We have to find it, but we must be careful. The fate of the galaxy could depend on it." The crew nodded, knowing that their mission had just taken a darker turn. They were no longer just exploring the past, they were now part of a larger conflict, one that stretched across time and space. Whatever came next, they were in this together, and the mystery of the ancient human ship was just the beginning. The cold, metallic walls of the control room seemed to close in around them as the last words of the holographic message echoed in the air. The crew of the Scepter stood frozen, each of them processing the gravity of what they had just witnessed. The human commander's warning had been clear, the war was far from over, and something terrible was hidden within the depths of this ancient base, something that, if misused, could ignite a galaxy-wide conflict once more. Zeleth's mind raced. A weapon, an unimaginable force left behind by a civilization that had vanished. The voice on the hologram had been filled with sorrow, but also with a warning that was impossible to ignore. The crew had come here seeking knowledge, but now they had stumbled into a deadly mystery, one that could have consequences far beyond their understanding. "We need to move," Zeleth said sharply, his voice steady but urgent. We need to find this weapon before anyone else does. It's not just a relic of humanity's past, it's a ticking time bomb. Thera, still standing by the console, glanced at him, her eyes wide with concern. But what if we're too late? What if someone else is already here? Someone who knows about this weapon? Zeloth didn't have an answer. He wished he did. The realization that they were not alone on this ancient, forgotten world sent a shiver down his spine. The crew of the Scepter had discovered this place by chance, but there was no telling who or what else might have been tracking them, waiting for the right moment to strike. There was too much at stake now, too much they didn't know. Prepare for anything, Zeloth ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. We move out in 5 minutes. Everyone gear up. We're going deeper into this base. The crew dispersed, each member quickly gathering their equipment and preparing for the unknown. As Zeloth checked his own gear, his mind wandered back to the voice they had heard. That commander, standing amidst the ruins of his people, delivering a message meant for anyone who might come after them. He couldn't help but feel a sense of connection to the man, a shared purpose even though they were separated by centuries. Humanity had fought its war, and now, the galaxy would have to deal with the consequences. The halls of the base were darker now, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows along the walls. The air felt thicker, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became, each footstep feeling louder than the last. But there was something else, a presence. Zeloth couldn't explain it, but he felt as if something old, something ancient was watching them. "Captain, over here," came Thera's voice, pulling him out of his thoughts. He turned to see her standing in front of a massive door, its surface adorned with more of the strange symbols they had seen throughout the ship. This door was different. It wasn't just a seal, it was an access point, a gateway to something far deeper within the base. Thera's eyes were wide as she examined the control panel beside the door. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "The access to the central chamber. This is where they hid the weapon." Zeloth stepped forward, his heart pounding. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of their discovery. They had come so far, and now, it all led to this moment. Whatever lay behind this door would shape the fate of their people and the entire galaxy. Thera worked quickly, her fingers moving over the control panel as she tried to unlock the door. The system was ancient, its interface unlike anything the crew had encountered before. It took several tense moments before a soft click echoed through the air, and the door slowly began to open, revealing a dimly lit hallway beyond. The crew exchanged nervous glances, each of them knowing that this was it, the heart of the base, the place where humanity's final weapon had been hidden. With a deep breath, Zeloth motioned for the crew to move forward. As they stepped into the hallway, the walls around them seemed to pulse, almost alive with energy. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, their meaning still a mystery. The further they went, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. Zeloth couldn't shake the sense that they were walking into a trap, that this was no ordinary discovery, but one that had been carefully set up to lure them in. At the end of the corridor, a large chamber opened up before them. The room was vast, its high ceiling lost in shadows. In the center stood a massive pedestal, atop which sat a gleaming metallic object, something that radiated an unnatural energy. The object was cylindrical, its surface smooth and reflective, but with strange markings etched into it. It was unmistakably a weapon, but unlike anything they had ever seen. The crew paused, staring at the weapon in awe and fear. It was both beautiful and terrifying, its energy pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly glow. Zeloth could feel the power emanating from it, and his instincts screamed at him to turn back. But there was no turning back now. They had come this far. They had to know what it was, what it could do. Thera stepped forward cautiously, her hand reaching out to touch the pedestal. This is it," she whispered. "The weapon." Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them rumbled, the lights flickered, and a harsh, mechanical voice filled the room, echoing off the walls. "Warning, unauthorized access detected, containment breach imminent, weapon activation in progress." The crew froze. The warning sent a jolt of fear through them, and for a moment, no one moved. But then the pedestal began to rise, the weapon lifting from its resting place, and hovering above the ground. The hum of energy grew louder, vibrating through the very air around them. Zeloth's mind raced. Get back, now. But it was too late. The weapon had activated, and its power surged, filling the room with a blinding light. The crew was thrown back as the ground cracked beneath them, and the air crackled with raw energy. Zeloth scrambled to his feet, trying to make sense of what was happening. The weapon had not only activated, it was reacting to their presence, responding to them. And then, with a deafening roar, the room shook violently, and the entire base seemed to come alive. The weapon had been unleashed, and the war that humanity had left behind was far from over. The air inside the chamber crackled with raw energy, as if the very walls of the base were vibrating in response to the weapon's activation. Zeleth staggered to his feet, his ears ringing from the force of the explosion that had thrown him back. The blinding light from the weapon had subsided, but the oppressive hum of power still echoed through the room, reverberating in his chest. The weapon hovered in the center of the chamber, its surface now glowing brighter than before, sending waves of energy out in every direction. "What have we done?" Thera's voice trembled as she struggled to regain her footing. She looked at the weapon, her face pale with shock and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. We didn't know." Interrupted, his voice harsh but steady. He didn't blame her, but the weight of their actions was pressing on him now, more than ever. The weapon was no longer just a relic, it was alive, pulsing with power, and they had unwittingly awakened it. The entire base seemed to be responding to the weapon's activation, as if the building itself were alive, reacting to the threat of being disturbed after all these centuries. A low mechanical worry noise filled the chamber, and suddenly, the door behind them slammed shut with a deafening thud. The crew turned in panic, only to find the walls of the base flickering, their once dormant consoles lighting up with messages. The terminals hummed with activity, as if some unseen hand had begun to access them. "It's locking us in," one of the crew members said, panic rising in his voice. "We can't get out." Zella felt the walls close in on him. Their escape route had vanished, and they were trapped in the heart of this ancient warship. And now, the weapon was waking up in a way they couldn't control. He didn't know how much time they had before it triggered something even worse. Suddenly, the holographic terminals flared to life, and a voice called and the chamber. Warning, unauthorized access detected. Hostile entities identified. Containment protocols initiated. Initiating defense systems. Zeleth's blood ran cold. Hostile entities. Was it referring to them? Before he could give an order, the floor beneath them rumbled, and the walls began to shift, revealing hidden compartments. Large, heavy doors slid open, and from the darkness beyond, a group of humanoid figures emerged. Their faces were obscured by helmets, their armor sleek and alien, unlike anything Zeleth had ever seen. Their movements were precise and purposeful, each of them carrying a weapon of incredible power. "They're here," Thera whispered in shock. "Who are they? Where did they come from?" Zeleth's mind raced. These weren't ordinary soldiers, these were something else. The way they moved, the way they stood together in perfect formation, made it clear they were a specialized force. These beings had been dormant in the base, hidden away for centuries, waiting for this moment, the moment when the weapon was activated. The humanoid figures didn't speak. They simply advanced, their weapons trained on the crew, as if they were programmed for one thing only, to stop anyone who dared to awaken the weapon. Zeleth stepped forward, his instincts kicking in. There was no room for hesitation now. He had to act. "Fall back," he shouted to his crew, pulling them toward a narrow passageway to the side. The team retreated as quickly as they could, but the soldiers followed, their movements swift and relentless. The glowing weapons in their hands pulsed with energy, each step they took sending ripples of light through the dimly lit corridor. Zeleth's heart raced. The crew had come here seeking answers, seeking the lost knowledge of humanity's past. But what they had uncovered now was far more dangerous than anything they could have imagined. The weapon, the soldiers, it was all part of some forgotten military machine. A defense system created to protect humanity's final secrets. But what if this wasn't just a defense? What if the weapon wasn't meant to be a last resort, but the beginning of something much larger? A weapon that could reignite the conflict that had ravaged the galaxy so long ago. "We need to find a way out of here," Zeleth said, his voice tight. Now, they continued running down the narrow passageways, the sound of boots pounding against the metal floors echoing through the halls. The soldiers were closing in on them, their weapons flashing with dangerous energy. Zeloth glanced over his shoulder, realizing just how quickly they were gaining on the crew. The base was large, too large, and they had no idea where they were going, only that they had to keep moving. "Captain," Thera shouted, pointing to a set of control panels up ahead. "They're those panels. Maybe we can access the central systems from there. We can override the lockdown and get the base's power systems to stop." Zeleth didn't hesitate. "Go now." The crew sprinted toward the control panels, with the soldiers hot on their heels. They reached the panel and Thera quickly went to work, her fingers moving across the console in rapid succession. The rest of the crew stood guard, weapons ready, watching the advancing soldiers with bated breath. The soldiers were close now, their weapons raised. It was clear they wouldn't stop. The crew was outnumbered, and they didn't have the firepower to stand their ground. Thera was still working on the console, her face intense as she typed in commands, trying to crack the base's security system. "I'm almost there," she muttered under her breath. "Just a little longer." Zealoth stood firm, his mind working fast. He couldn't afford to wait. If the soldiers reached them, it would be the end. As the soldiers closed in, Zealoth made a snap decision. "Fall back to the ship," he ordered. "We can't stay here. Move," without a second thought. The crew turned and ran back the way they had come, with the soldiers pursuing them relentlessly. Zealoth's heart hammered in his chest as they pushed forward, knowing that time was running out. They had to make it back to the scepter before the base's defense systems fully activated, before the weapon could unleash its full power. They rounded a corner and saw the distant airlock that would lead them to the ship. But as they neared, Zella felt the ground tremble beneath them once again. The base was shifting, reacting to their every move, and the weapon at its core was still humming, still growing in power. The war, it seemed, was far from over. It had simply been waiting, buried beneath the surface, until the moment was right to awaken. And now, that moment had arrived. The rumble of the base shook through the soles of their boots as the crew of the scepter sprinted toward the airlock. Zealoth's heart pounded as he glanced back. The alien soldiers were relentless, their glowing weapons slicing through the dim corridors with precise bursts of energy. Sparks flew from the walls where stray beams struck, illuminating the terror etched on the crew's faces. Every second they lost could mean the end not just for them, but for the galaxy if the weapon was unleashed. "Keep moving. Don't stop," Zealoth shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony of alarms and rumbling metal. Thera was just ahead, her fingers still moving frantically over the panel. She glanced back, panic in her eyes. "I can override the lockdown, but it'll take a few more minutes." Zealoth felt a chill run through him. The soldiers were gaining, and the base itself seemed alive, twisting its corridors to block their path. He knew they couldn't outrun it forever, they had to act smart. "Listen," he called. "We're not just running, we're drawing them into the central chamber. That's where the weapon is weakest. Once we reach it, we can contain it." The crew followed without hesitation, their trust in Zealoth absolute despite the terror coursing through them. They zigzagged through the twisting corridors, the walls rattling as if the ship itself were protesting their intrusion. Ahead, the faint glow of the central chamber pulsed like a heartbeat. That's where humanity's ancient legacy and danger-waited. As they neared the chamber, the alien soldiers split, some heading to flank them, others pressing straight ahead. Zealoth realized they weren't just defending the weapon, they were programmed to neutralize anything that came near it. There was no room for mistakes. Thera's fingers flew across the console, sparks of green light flickering across her face. "Almost there," she cried. "I just need to hack into the containment matrix." Suddenly, one of the soldiers leaped forward, its weapon raised. Before Zealoth could react, energy lanced across the corridor. The crew dove to the side. Barely avoiding the beam, Zealoth fired his blaster, and the soldier went down with a sizzle of burning circuits, but there were too many. Every moment spent fighting cost them precious time. "Keep moving," Zealoth shouted, grabbing Thera's arm. "The chamber, that's our only chance." They burst into the central chamber, the weapon hovering ominously above the pedestal. Its pulsing energy filled the room, making the air thick and heavy, almost impossible to breathe. Sparks arced from the walls as the containment systems fluctuated wildly. The alien soldiers followed, but Zealoth had already predicted their moves. "Thera now. Override the containment," he commanded. Thera plunged her hands into the console, her eyes narrowed with focus. Sweat dripped down her forehead as she typed in command after command, rerouting power and overriding ancient protocols. The weapon's glow intensified, almost as if it recognized the intrusion and reacted with aggression. Zealoth and the crew formed a defensive circle, fending off the approaching soldiers with blasters and precise maneuvers. Each shot was critical. Missing could mean death or worse, triggering the weapon's full power. Minutes stretched like hours. The weapon hummed louder, vibrating through their bones. Then, with a final keystroke, Thera cried out, "I've got it. Containment override complete." For a heartbeat, everything froze. The weapon hovered silently, its pulsing energy stabilizing. The alien soldiers faltered, their programming unable to override the containment now controlled by the crew. Then, almost simultaneously, the room's alarms cut off. Silence fell, heavy and tense. Zeleth lowered his weapon, exhaustion and relief flooding through him. It's done. The weapon is contained. But we need to leave. Now. The crew ran toward the airlock, the base still trembling behind them. The corridors were cracking, fragments of metal falling as the ancient ship struggled to maintain integrity. They reached the airlock and slammed the door shut just as another tremor shook the base, sending debris flying. Breathing heavily, Zeleth looked back at the weapon through the reinforced glass. It pulsed one last time, a quiet, steady heartbeat in the darkness. It was safe for now, but he knew the danger wasn't gone. Humanity's legacy was preserved, but it had awoken something powerful and unforgiving. A reminder that the wars of the past could ripple into the future. Is everyone okay? He asked, scanning his crew. Nods and murmurs of relief met him. Thera gave him a tired smile. We did it, she said quietly. We stopped it, before anyone else could use it. Zeleth didn't respond. His mind was racing ahead, thinking about the galaxy, the ancient human conflicts, and the hidden dangers still out there. The scepter lifted off from the ancient base, leaving behind the weapon and its guardians. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, the stars stretched out before them, a galaxy wide open, full of secrets, wars, and legacies yet to unfold. The ship's sensors picked up signals from other sectors, faint anomalies that hinted at more hidden relics, more weapons, and more remnants of humanity's thousand-year war. Zeleth realized that their journey had only begun. Humanity's past wasn't dead. It had been waiting for discovery, and now, the responsibility to protect. It tore harness it trusted with them. In the silence of the command deck, Zeleth gazed out at the stars. The galaxy was alive, ancient, and dangerous. And somewhere out there, civilizations unaware of humanity's legacy were about to encounter a history they weren't prepared for. He turned to his crew. We've survived the weapon, but this is just the beginning. The past has awakened, and it's up to us to guide the future. The scepter jumped to faster-than-light speed, leaving the ruined base behind. The galaxy awaited, filled with mysteries, dangers, and the lingering echoes of 1,000 centuries of war. The adventure was far from over.